Daniel never imagined that an envelope could reopen wounds he had worked so hard to heal. It arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, mixed in with bills and school notices. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind that didn't belong in his small rented home. For a moment, he thought it was a mistake. His name was printed neatly on the front, spelled correctly, something that rarely happened. He stood by the door longer than he meant to, holding it like it might bite him if he opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation, not just any wedding. It was from his ex-wife's family. Daniel sat down slowly on the couch, the same couch he had slept on for months after the divorce, when the bed felt too empty. His daughter's school bag lay on the floor nearby, half open, crayons spilling out. Life was simple now. Busy, tiring, but peaceful. He worked, cooked, helped with homework, and tried his best to be both mother and father. He had learned to enjoy quiet evenings and early mornings. He had learned not to look back. Until now, the invitation was for the wedding of his ex-wife's younger sister. A big event, judging by the details. A fancy venue. A long guest list. Everything about it screamed money and pride. At the bottom of the card, written in neat cursive, was a line that made his chest tighten. "We would be honored by your presence." Daniel let out a short laugh, one without humor. Honored was the last word he would use to describe how that family ever treated him. From the very beginning, they had made it clear he wasn't good enough. He didn't come from money. He didn't have connections. He worked long hours at a job that paid the bills, but didn't impress anyone at fancy dinners. They smiled to his face and judged him behind his back. Sometimes they didn't even bother hiding it. When the marriage fell apart, they made sure he knew who they blamed. They said he wasn't ambitious enough, that he held their daughter back, that she could have done better. When the divorce became final, they acted as if he no longer existed, or so he thought. Daniel folded the invitation and placed it on the table. His first instinct was to throw it away. He didn't need their approval. He didn't want to be reminded of years spent trying to please people who never cared. He had moved on. He had survived, but something about the invitation felt wrong. That evening, after dinner, he received a message from an old acquaintance who still had ties to the family. The message was short but clear. They invited you on purpose. Don't be fooled. They want to see you, talk about you, laugh. Daniel stared at the phone for a long time. His daughter was in the next room, humming as she colored. He didn't want anger in his home. He didn't want bitterness to touch her life. Yet the truth sat heavy in his chest. They weren't inviting him to be kind. They were inviting him to remind him of his place. The days that followed were restless. Daniel tried to focus on work, but his thoughts kept drifting. He remembered past family gatherings where he had been made to feel small. The jokes about his job, the comments about his car, the way conversations stopped when he entered a room. He remembered standing alone while others laughed together. He wondered why now. Why after all this time? The answer was simple. They believed he was still the same man they had looked down on. Still struggling. Still barely getting by. Still someone they could point at and say, "At least we're not him." The idea hurt more than he expected. Daniel had spent years rebuilding his life quietly. No big announcements. No social media posts. He worked hard, took risks, failed, learned, and tried again. He did it all while packing lunches and reading bedtime stories. He didn't do it to prove anything to anyone. He did it because he had no choice. Now they wanted him back in their world. Not to celebrate, but to be an example of what they thought failure looked like. One night, after putting his daughter to bed, Daniel picked up the invitation again. He read every word slowly. The date, the place, the names. His hands were steady, For the first time, he asked himself a question he hadn't considered before. What if he went? Not to fight, not to argue, not to explain himself, just to show up. Daniel wasn't sure what scared him more, facing them again, or realizing that he was no longer afraid of them at all. He thought about his daughter, about the kind of example he wanted to set. He didn't want her to grow up running from the past. He wanted her to see strength in calm, not loud words. He also knew something else. He didn't owe them anything. Not shame, not silence, not absence. If they wanted him there to feel small, they were about to be disappointed. The decision didn't come with anger. It came with clarity. Daniel picked up his phone and sent a short reply. I'll be there. When he set the phone down, his heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Control. They had invited him to humiliate him. They believed the story they had told themselves for years. They believed he was still broken. They had no idea how wrong they were. Daniel didn't plan to explain it to them. He would let reality speak for itself. The wedding day arrived, sooner than Daniel expected. He woke up early, long before the alarm, staring at the ceiling while memories tried to pull him backward. He pushed them away and got out of bed quietly so he wouldn't wake his daughter. The house was still peaceful, the kind of peace he had worked hard to build. He made coffee, stood by the window, and reminded himself that today was just another day. Nothing more. But deep down, he knew it. WASN single quotes T. After breakfast, he helped his daughter get ready. She was excited, asking questions about the wedding, the music, and whether there would be cake. Daniel smiled and answered patiently. He didn't want her to sense any tension. This day wasn't about his past. It was about showing her how to walk into any room without fear. He chose his clothes carefully. Nothing flashy. Nothing meant to impress. Just clean, simple, and comfortable. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't see the man he used to be, the tired husband, always trying to prove his worth. He saw someone calmer now. Someone who had survived disappointment and learned to stand on his own. The drive to the venue was quiet. His daughter hummed softly in the back seat, swinging her feet. Daniel focused on the road, feeling steady. Whatever happened today, he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't shrink himself for anyone. The venue was even grander than the invitation suggested. Tall doors, polished floors, people dressed in expensive clothes. It was the kind of place that once made Daniel feel out of place. Today, he felt different. Not proud. Not nervous. Just present. As soon as they walked in, he felt it. The looks. Some were quick, others lingered too long. Conversations paused. A few heads leaned together, whispers forming. Daniel didn't rush. He didn't slow down either. He simply walked forward, holding his daughter's hand, acknowledging people with small nods. Someone muttered, "He actually came." Another voice replied, "I didn't think he would." Daniel heard them. He always had sharp hearing, but the words didn't sink in the way they once would have. They floated past him, harmless. He spotted his ex-wife across the room. She froze when she saw him. Her expression flickered between surprise and discomfort. She looked him over quickly, as if searching for signs of struggle. When she didn't find them, her eyes narrowed slightly. Daniel didn't wave. He didn't avoid her either. He simply looked away and focused on his daughter. They found seats near the side, away from the center. Daniel preferred it that way. He wasn't there to be noticed. But somehow, attention followed him anyway. As more guests arrived, the quiet judgment became clearer. Old relatives looked him up and down. Some smiled politely. Others didn't bother hiding their disbelief. A few seemed almost disappointed that he looked fine. One man approached, someone who used to make jokes at Daniel's expense during family gatherings. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said, forcing a laugh. "Didn't expect to see you here." Daniel nodded calmly. "I was invited." The man chuckled. "Brave." Daniel didn't respond. He just smiled lightly and turned back to his daughter, who was watching everything closely. The ceremony began, and for a while, the room quieted. Music played. People stood. The bride walked in, glowing, surrounded by admiration. Daniel watched respectfully. Despite everything, he wished no harm. He had come with a clean heart. As the vows were exchanged, Daniel felt something unexpected distance. Not sadness, not jealousy, just distance. The life he once imagined here was no longer his, and he was okay with that. When the ceremony ended and people moved toward the reception area, the noise returned. Laughter, clinking glasses, polite chatter. That's when the comments started again, softer this time, disguised as small talk. "So, what are you doing these days?" Someone asked, voice sweet but sharp underneath. "Working." "Raising my daughter," Daniel replied. "Oh, still just that?" Another added, smiling thinly. Daniel nodded. "That's enough for me." The smiles faded slightly. It wasn't the answer they wanted. He noticed how often people tried to lead the conversation toward his past. His old job. The divorce. The choices he made years ago. Each time, Daniel answered briefly, honestly, without defensiveness. And each time, the person asking seemed less satisfied. They wanted embarrassment. They wanted regret. They didn't get it. His daughter tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, can we look at the decorations?" "Of course," he said. As they walked around, Daniel noticed something else. A few guests looked at him differently. Not with judgment, but curiosity. Some even nodded respectfully. A woman complimented his daughter's dress. A man asked where he had gotten his jacket. Small moments, but they mattered. At one table, someone mentioned a recent event in town. Daniel casually added a comment, not realizing that the person he was speaking to had connections. "Oh, that was handled really well," the man said. "Who was behind it?" Daniel shrugged. "I helped organize parts of it." The man's eyebrows lifted. "Really?" "Yes, that was it." No bragging. No details. But the reaction didn't go unnoticed. A few minutes later, Daniel heard his name mentioned nearby. Then again. Soft, questioning tones. People began looking at him with new interest. His ex-wife noticed too. She approached cautiously, as if stepping into unfamiliar ground. "I didn't think you'd come," she said. "I said I would," Daniel replied gently. She hesitated. "You seem different." "I am," he said simply. She studied him for a moment, then nodded and walked away, clearly unsettled. The reception continued, but the energy around Daniel had shifted. The same people who earlier made comments now avoided them. Others tried to engage him in conversation, asking what he had been up to, where he was working now. Daniel kept everything simple. No exaggeration. No need to impress. Still, the more he spoke, the clearer it became that their assumptions were wrong. At one point, a relative laughed awkwardly and said, "We didn't think you were doing this well." Daniel met their eyes calmly. "I stopped trying to prove myself a long time ago." That sentence spread faster than he expected. His daughter danced nearby, carefree, unaware of the quiet storm forming among the adults. Daniel watched her with pride. No matter what happened tonight, this was already worth it. As dinner was served, the whispers grew louder. Not cruel this time. Confused, curious, uncomfortable. They had invited him expecting to feel superior. Instead, they were questioning everything they thought they knew. Daniel sat back in his chair, eating slowly, feeling steady. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't defended himself. He hadn't tried to win. And yet, without trying, he had already changed the room. The night was far from over, and the people who invited him to humiliate him were beginning to realize they had made a serious mistake. The wedding continued, but the atmosphere had shifted in ways that even Daniel's ex-wife could feel. At first, she had thought his presence would be an annoyance, a brief moment to endure while the rest of the celebration went on as planned. But now, as conversations paused when he entered a room and eyes followed him wherever he went, it became clear that things were changing. Quietly, steadily, Daniel had become the center of attention, not because he demanded it, but because he simply existed as himself. He hadn't planned it, of course. He had no intention of overshadowing the day. He had come to see it through, to prove to himself that he could walk into a room that once filled him with anxiety and leave without shame. But now, others were noticing the man he had become, and some were realizing how wrong they had been to underestimate him. A distant cousin approached, holding a glass of champagne. He spoke carefully, almost cautiously, as if testing the water. "I heard about the project you've been working on," he said. "Big success, isn't it?" Daniel nodded, smiling politely. "It's going well. I'm happy with how things are going." The cousin's eyes widened slightly. "Wow. I didn't expect that." Daniel said nothing more. That was the point. He didn't need to explain himself. His life was no one's story to judge, and yet, in that single interaction, the cousin began to see the truth. Daniel was no longer the man they had, written off years ago. The whispers spread slowly but surely across the room. Guests who had barely acknowledged him now watched with a mixture of curiosity and surprise. Someone commented on his calm demeanor, another on the way he carried himself, a subtle confidence that couldn't be faked. Every glance, every small interaction, made it harder for his ex-wife's family to maintain the illusion of the man they thought they knew. Even the bride noticed. She leaned toward her new husband during the reception, whispering something about how unusual it was to see him there. They didn't know the full story, but they could sense the shift. The family that had planned to assert dominance over Daniel suddenly seemed unsure, their rehearsed smiles faltering. At one point, a family member made a pointed comment about his past struggles, meant to cut like a knife. "I didn't think you'd come all the way here from your old job," they said with a smirk. Daniel looked at them calmly, meeting their eyes without anger or fear. "I come for myself," he said softly. "Not for approval." The room fell silent for a moment. Not because anyone disagreed with him, but because no one had expected that kind of response. There was no defensiveness, no shame, just a quiet strength that spoke louder than any words could. He continued moving through the crowd, engaging politely when necessary, avoiding the traps set to embarrass him. Every interaction reinforced a simple truth. He had grown, and they had not seen it coming. During the dinner, someone mentioned a recent collaboration with a well-known company. It was casual, as if they were trying to be helpful, but the information carried weight. Daniel's ex-wife's family froze slightly. They had thought they understood his life. They had thought they had power. Now, they were realizing that he was connected to the kind of success and stability they had always valued, but never acknowledged in him. Daniel didn't flaunt it. He didn't gloat or make anyone feel small. He simply answered questions when asked and moved through the evening with quiet dignity. The contrast between him and the family's expectations created a tension that was impossible to ignore. At one point, he noticed his daughter standing near a group of relatives she barely knew. She looked a little nervous, clutching her father's hand. Daniel knelt down to her level, speaking softly. "It's okay," he said. "I'm right here. We'll just watch and enjoy the party." Her face relaxed. She smiled and nodded, stepping a little closer to him. Daniel realized that this was the moment that mattered most. He wasn't there to prove anything to the family. He was there to show his daughter what it meant to face difficult situations with courage and calm. That lesson was far more valuable than any confrontation could ever be. Later, as music filled the room and guests began to dance, Daniel observed the subtle changes in people's behavior. Conversations had shifted from polite civility to curiosity. Some asked questions about his work, his life, his daughter. Others simply watched him, trying to reconcile the man they saw now with the image they had held for years. His ex-wife approached him quietly, her expression complicated. There was surprise, yes, but also something else, a recognition of what she had underestimated. "I didn't know." She started, then stopped. Words failed her. Daniel smiled gently. "I've been doing my best," he said simply. "Just like you have." There was no accusation, no bitterness. The calmness in his tone made her words feel small and unnecessary. She turned away, unsure how to respond, realizing that the story she had clung to for years was no longer accurate. The evening continued, and more people began to see Daniel in a new light. The cousins who had once mocked him now asked questions, trying to understand how he had achieved his quiet success. His ex-wife's family, once confident and dismissive, became cautious, uncertain, and slightly embarrassed by their own assumptions. Daniel noticed it all, but he didn't let it change him. He didn't need their approval or acknowledgement. He simply moved through the room as himself, engaging where necessary, retreating where he wanted, always calm and composed. Each step, each interaction, reinforced the quiet power of resilience, patience, and dignity. At one point, he found himself standing near the dessert table, watching his daughter delight in the treats. She laughed freely, unburdened by family tension, and he felt a wave of relief. Despite everything, despite the awkwardness and the subtle tension, this was the life he had built. This was the peace he had fought for. And then it happened. Someone mentioned Daniel's name in a conversation about a business project connected to the wedding itself. The words traveled across the room like wildfire. Guests froze mid-sentence. Eyes turned toward him. The family realized in that moment that he was no longer just an observer. They were now linked to his world in ways they hadn't expected. Daniel didn't speak loudly or draw attention. He simply smiled politely and continued to converse. But the subtle shift was undeniable. The family's carefully constructed hierarchy had been disrupted, not by confrontation, but by the truth of his life becoming visible in their midst. As the night wore on, Daniel and his daughter shared quiet moments together, sitting at the edge of the dance floor, watching the celebration unfold. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from revenge, not from proving a point, but from knowing that he had faced a room designed to humiliate him and left with dignity intact. The subtle power of presence, he realized, was stronger than any argument, stronger than any insult or mocking remark. By simply being himself, by living honestly and calmly, he had begun to change the story. The family that had once sought to make him feel small now struggled to understand him, and in that struggle, he found a quiet victory. By the time the final dance approached, it was clear that Daniel's presence had shifted more than just the mood of the room. Conversations had changed, whispers had turned to cautious respect, and even those who had once sneered now seemed unsure of how to respond. He had not humiliated anyone. He had not interfered or demanded attention. But his quiet dignity had spoken volumes. He looked at his daughter, twirling to the music with carefree joy, and felt a profound sense of peace. This was what mattered most, teaching her, by example, the power of calm, resilience, and self-respect. The rest, the judgment, the whispers, the old assumptions was irrelevant. As the night ended and the guests began to leave, Daniel understood something essential. He had walked into a room full of people who thought they held power over him, and he had left without shame, without anger, without conflict. In doing so, he had revealed a truth that no one could ignore. He had grown, quietly and profoundly, into a man they had never expected him to become. And as he held his daughter's hand and stepped out into the cool night air, he realized that the most important part of the evening was not the recognition or the surprise on others' faces. It was that he had shown her, in real time, what it meant to face challenges with calm strength and unwavering integrity. That lesson, he knew, would last far longer than any family rivalry, any whispered insult, or any social expectation. Daniel had not come to prove anything to anyone. He had come to show himself and his daughter that life could be faced with courage and dignity, and in doing so, he had already won the most important victory of all. The next part of the evening felt different. The energy in the room was heavier, more tense, though no one spoke of it directly. Daniel moved through the crowd as usual, calm, polite, letting the events unfold around him. But the subtle shifts in glances and hushed conversations were impossible to ignore. People had begun to realize that the man they thought they knew no longer existed. He was someone else entirely, someone they had underestimated for far too long. Daniel noticed the way his ex-wife's family now interacted with him. Their smiles were forced, their conversations cautious. They had tried for years to make him feel small, to remind him of mistakes and shortcomings, and now the tables were quietly turned. They could see that he had rebuilt his life, that he was self-assured and capable, and that no insult or whisper could shake him. It began with small incidents. One of the wedding planners, who had previously dealt with Daniel's ex-wife's family, casually mentioned in front of them that Daniel's company was responsible for several of the decorations and services at the wedding. It was meant as a polite comment, but the effect was electric. Eyes widened, jaws tightened, and suddenly the family realized that they were unknowingly standing in the orbit of someone who had influence over the very event they had thought was theirs to control. A relative, clearly unsettled, whispered, He arranged all this?" "Yes," another replied. "And apparently he's been involved in other events too. Big projects. High-profile stuff." The whispers spread across the room, reaching the ears of the bride and groom, who exchanged confused looks. They hadn't realized the connection either. The celebration that was meant to highlight their family's success now quietly acknowledged someone they had assumed would not even matter. Daniel, as always, remained calm. He did not boast. He did not flaunt. He answered questions simply with honesty, allowing his achievements to speak for themselves. Every interaction further challenged the family's assumptions. The more they tried to maintain the upper hand through polite remarks or pointed questions, the more obvious it became that their power over him had evaporated. At one point, a cousin attempted to provoke him subtly. "Still living in the same neighborhood?" the cousin asked, voice casual but edged with judgment. Daniel smiled gently. "Yes, and it's a good place for us," he replied. "My daughter likes it, and I'm comfortable there." The cousin blinked, taken aback. There was no shame, no apology needed, just a simple statement of truth. The attempt at humiliation failed entirely. The tension continued to build. The family's whispers and cautious glances became more frequent. Even the younger relatives, who had no memory of Daniel's struggles, sensed the shift. They were curious, impressed, and slightly intimidated, though they did not yet understand why. Daniel had become someone they respected quietly, even without trying. Meanwhile, Daniel's daughter was oblivious to the tension. She laughed, danced, and enjoyed the sweets, moving freely through the crowd. Her joy reminded him why he had come. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to show her how to carry herself in difficult situations, how to face challenges with integrity, and how to maintain calm when others tried to make her feel small. A significant moment came when one of the family elders, who had always been vocal about Daniel's shortcomings, attempted a pointed comment about a past mistake. The words hung in the air, meant to sting. Daniel listened quietly. Then he smiled, a simple, calm smile, and said, "I've learned from that. I still do my best every day." The room went silent. No one expected such a response. No anger, no excuses, just acknowledgement and calm strength. The elder opened his mouth again, hesitated, and then changed the topic. It was clear that Daniel's quiet confidence was having a ripple effect. Every subtle act of judgment, every attempt to assert superiority, was being diffused by his simple composure. The family could no longer rely on their previous assumptions. The man they thought they could dismiss had become someone they couldn't ignore. As the evening progressed, another subtle shift occurred. A conversation about the catering and flower arrangements revealed that Daniel's input had been more than helpful. He had played a central role in organizing parts of the wedding. This revelation hit the family harder than any words could have. They had assumed the event showcased only their wealth and taste, but in reality, they had been unknowingly benefiting from Daniel's expertise and network. The realization caused awkwardness. Some guests tried to hide it with forced smiles. Others whispered among themselves, trying to piece together what they had missed. Daniel remained calm, aware of the change, but entirely focused on his daughter and the celebration itself. He didn't need to confront or embarrass anyone. The truth of his life, visible quietly and naturally, was enough. At one point, his ex-wife approached him again. She looked conflicted, a mixture of surprise, frustration, and admiration in her eyes. I didn't realize," she said quietly. "You didn't need to," Daniel replied softly. "I've just been living my life." Her expression faltered. The years of assumptions, the judgments, the casual dismissal, they had all been challenged in this simple exchange. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that the man she had once thought she knew was now a person entirely different. Someone resilient, capable, and quietly successful. The climax of the evening came when a vendor, speaking in casual conversation, mentioned Daniel's name again. The connections became clear. Many of the wedding services had been coordinated through him. Guests looked around, piecing it together. The family, once confident and smug, now felt exposed, their assumptions crumbling in real time. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand recognition. He simply nodded politely when people spoke to him, answered questions honestly, and continued to move calmly through the evening. Yet the effect was undeniable. The family's carefully constructed hierarchy, built on the belief that they held power over him, was quietly unraveling. By the time dessert was being served, the tension was palpable. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement. Daniel was not who they thought he was. The room had shifted around him without him having to say a single boastful word. His presence, his calm confidence, and his honest life had done what no argument could ever accomplish. Daniel found his daughter again near the edge of the room. She had her favorite dessert in hand, smiling freely, unaware of the subtle tensions swirling around her. He knelt beside her and whispered, "See? Sometimes just being yourself is enough." She looked up at him, eyes bright, and nodded. "I see," she said simply, understanding more than she realized. The rest of the evening continued with a mix of celebration and subtle unease for the family. Daniel observed quietly, content with his calm victory. He hadn't humiliated anyone. He hadn't caused conflict. Yet by existing authentically, by living with dignity, he had exposed the cracks in the family's assumptions, revealing a truth they could no longer deny. As the night wound down, Daniel and his daughter prepared to leave. He looked around one last time, noticing the subtle glances, the quiet acknowledgments, and even the hesitations in conversation. The family had learned something without confrontation or argument. They had misjudged him, underestimated him, and ignored the person he had quietly become. Daniel stepped out into the cool night air, holding his daughter's hand. He felt a profound sense of peace. The evening had been tense, challenging, and emotional, but it had also been revealing. He had not only stood his ground, but he had also shown the people around him that true strength comes from calm confidence, honesty, and integrity, not loud words or displays of dominance. As they walked to the car, Daniel glanced back at the venue. The lights shone brightly, but he no longer felt any tension or resentment. The past was behind him. The family's assumptions had been quietly dismantled, and he had proven, in the most natural way possible, that dignity and resilience could speak louder than mockery or judgment. And most importantly, he had shown his daughter what it truly meant to face life's challenges with strength and grace. That lesson, he knew, would last far longer than any fleeting embarrassment, any whispered comment, or any moment of judgment from the past. The night air was cool as Daniel and his daughter stepped out of the venue. The sounds of laughter and music lingered behind them, but they felt distant, like a world that no longer had power over him. He held his daughter's hand, noticing the quiet pride in her smile. She had seen him navigate the evening with calm and dignity, and in that small, simple way, he had already taught her one of life's most important lessons. Strength didn't always need to be loud, and confidence didn't always demand recognition. As they walked toward the car, Daniel reflected on the night. Every expectation that his ex-wife's family had held, every whispered attempt at humiliation, had quietly unraveled. It hadn't been about confrontation or drama. It had been about presence. By simply being himself, honest, composed, capable, he had shown them a truth they could no longer ignore. And yet, there was no gloating, no satisfaction in revenge. There was only calm, quiet triumph. Once they were settled in the car, his daughter turned to him. "Dad, you were amazing tonight," she said, eyes wide. "You didn't get mad, and no one could make you feel bad." Daniel smiled, squeezing her hand. "I just stayed true to who I am," he said softly. "And that's enough. You'll see, life always works better when you stay honest and calm, even when others try to hurt you." She nodded, processing the lesson in her own way. Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He hadn't only preserved his dignity. He had passed something even more important to his daughter, a model of resilience, patience, and quiet strength. That, he realized, was more valuable than any recognition, more important than any victory over judgment. The drive home was peaceful. The city lights passed by in soft, fleeting patterns, and Daniel felt an unusual calm settle over him. He had faced a room full of people who once tried to define him by his past, and he had walked through it without shame. He had not let their opinions dictate his self-worth, and in doing so, he had discovered a kind of freedom he hadn't felt in years. When they arrived home, his daughter bounded inside, excited to talk about the party, the music, and the desserts. Daniel followed, smiling quietly, letting her recount every detail. He had no need to dwell on the awkward moments, the whispers, or the subtle tensions. Those were not his story anymore. His story was this: a life rebuilt, a life lived with integrity, and a life that could quietly, powerfully influence others without needing to fight. Later that night, after tucking his daughter into bed, Daniel sat in the quiet of his living room. The events of the evening replayed in his mind, not as a series of challenges, but as a confirmation of something he had known all along. He had grown stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than he had ever been in the years of his marriage. The family that had once sought to humiliate him now had to confront the reality that he was no longer defined by their opinions. He had become someone untouchable by their judgment, not through aggression, but through calm. Steady authenticity. Daniel thought about the people at the wedding who had been surprised, the relatives who whispered, the elders who had paused mid-sentence. He realized that their discomfort wasn't about him. It was about their own assumptions, their own need to control narratives. And by being present, by existing as himself, he had forced them to see a truth they had ignored for too long. That realization brought a quiet smile to his face. In the days that followed, Daniel noticed subtle changes, even in how he remembered the evening. There was no lingering bitterness, no desire for revenge. Instead, he felt a profound sense of clarity. He had faced a situation designed to humiliate him, and he had emerged unshaken, composed, and stronger than before. That was the real victory, one that didn't depend on others' recognition, but on his own understanding of his worth. His daughter, too, carried a spark of understanding. She began to reflect what she had observed: patience, calm, and the quiet power of integrity. Daniel knew that she had learned more in one evening than many adults do in a lifetime. He had given her an example she could carry with her forever, one that no words or lectures could replace. A few weeks later, Daniel received a message from a distant relative, someone who had witnessed the evening from the start. It was short but meaningful. "You handled everything with grace. I've never seen someone stay so calm under pressure. Respect." Daniel read the words and smiled. He didn't need more. He had already experienced the true outcome, the realization that living honestly, facing challenges without anger, and staying calm in the face of judgment had more power than any confrontation could ever have. He began to notice changes even in his ex-wife's family. Invitations were sent differently, conversations held differently. Not because they suddenly liked him more, but because they had to adjust their perception. They had misjudged him, underestimated him, and in doing so, they were forced to see the truth quietly but unmistakably. Daniel had shifted the dynamic without a single raised voice or harsh word. As the months passed, Daniel continued his life with the same steady rhythm. Work, parenting, and personal growth filled his days. But he carried with him a newfound sense of freedom. The memory of that wedding remained, not as a source of tension, but as a reminder of how far he had come. He had faced a challenge that could have been uncomfortable or humiliating, and he had walked through it with dignity, teaching not only himself, but also his daughter what strength truly looked like. He often thought about that night, when moments of doubt crept in, when challenges at work or parenting felt overwhelming. He would remember the quiet strength he had relied on, the calm presence that had spoken louder than any words, and it would anchor him. That evening had become a touchstone, a guide for handling life's unexpected tests. Daniel also noticed how his perspective had shifted. He no longer viewed his ex-wife's family with anger or resentment. They were simply people operating within their own assumptions, limited by their inability to see beyond appearances. His triumph wasn't about defeating them. It was about rising above the need for their approval. That understanding brought him peace and allowed him to live fully in the present. One evening, as he watched his daughter draw at the kitchen table, he realized something profound. The wedding, the family, the whispers, the subtle judgments, they had all been part of a test he hadn't even realized he was taking. And he had passed. Not by fighting, not by proving anything, but by living honestly, calmly, and with integrity. The victory was internal, quiet, and uncheckable. He knew that life would bring other challenges, other moments where people might try to diminish him or question his worth. But the lesson from that evening would stay with him forever. Dignity, calm, and authenticity are stronger than mockery, louder than judgment, and more lasting than fleeting approval. And in teaching this to his daughter, Daniel realized he had done something even greater. He had passed on a guide to life that no one could take away, the knowledge that staying true to oneself, no matter the pressure or expectations of others, is the most powerful form of strength. Years later, when he looked back on that wedding, he didn't remember the whispers or the attempts to embarrass him. He remembered the calm he felt, the quiet victories, and the joy of seeing his daughter learn from him. He remembered how being present, honest, and composed could shift entire dynamics without a single raised voice. And most importantly, he remembered the pride in himself, not the pride of being recognized, but the pride of knowing he had faced a challenge with grace. The story of that evening became a touchstone for Daniel, a memory that reminded him of his growth and resilience. It reminded him that life's tests aren't always dramatic or loud. Sometimes they are quiet rooms filled with expectation and judgment. And sometimes the greatest victory is simply to walk through them with dignity, teaching those who matter most, especially his daughter, what true strength looks like. Daniel's life continued, full of ordinary moments, hard work, and love. But the lesson from that wedding remained alive in him, quietly guiding his actions, shaping his perspective, and reminding him that the best way to face life's challenges is with calm, honesty, and unwavering integrity. In the end, he had not just survived the evening. He had transformed it, not for anyone else, but for himself and for his daughter. And in that transformation, he discovered a truth that would stay with him forever. True power comes not from humiliating others, but from living authentically, staying calm in the face of judgment, and teaching the next generation through example. And that, Daniel realized, was a victory far greater than anyone had expected.